Hey, good morning everyone, it's TractorMan44 here. You know, I've had a few comments over the course of the last year or so that professed a desire to maybe see some of the older stuff or some of the junk I got inside my workshop. And today's another miserable day I don't want to spend outside. I could if I wanted to, don't want to though. So let's go ahead and take a look. Back around turn of the century and beyond, there was a pretty good sized factory in town. I'm not going to tell you the name of it, but it was it was one of the largest employers in the area. Consequently, a lot of people, you know, in the community worked there. Dozens and dozens and dozens of them. It had about 100 years run, and then of course it closed up and relocated, whatever the big factories do. But at any rate, inside that factory had a machine shop, and that machine shop was notorious for lending itself to government projects. Now, if y'all know what government projects are ones that sometimes kind of get tagged on to another project and get made, you know, on the clock at some of these institutions, so to speak. Somehow or another, my dad ended up with this thing here, and it's made specifically for sharpening circular saw blades. Some ingenious guy, it might have been my dad, I don't know, had this made. This is plate aluminum, but it's a simple little thing. Anybody could do it themselves in their own workshop. But it's got 4 mounting holes on the mountain base, and you go ahead and screw it to the workbench, and then it's got the wing nut on the front. You take the wing nut off and you put on whatever circular blade it is that you want to sharpen, and then you go about the business of going ahead and doing your touching up, whatever it is that you got to do by hand. You go ahead and sharpen the backs of the teeth, the face of the teeth, and if you had to, you could go ahead and cut your gullets in. I need to point out too that this is all pre-carbide. All these are just plain steel teeth. This is something the old man gave to me way back in the late 70s. He took an old broken out handle from an old sledgehammer and fitted it to fit inside these ferrules here. And this thing has not really been used all that much because it's not ground down, it's not misshaped or anything. It's in really pretty good shape. By the way, it's got the fanciest letters right here, ETW on it. I have no idea what that is, who it was or whatever. I've never sharpened it myself. The old man never sharpened it. He just gave it to me and I hung it on the wall. Have y'all ever heard of a barn builder's or a boat builder's chisel? When they're building those barns to creating those mortise joints, those mortise and tenon joints. Now this thing, I am certain, started out much longer and had been sharpened down on the old foot treadle grinding wheels, sharpened down and stuff, and of course that's why it's so short. Yeah, this thing is really pretty old. It's got a very nice handle in it. This thing is still all original. This thing is 3 inches, 3.5 inches wide. About 3.5 inches wide right there, and then the total length of this is about 12 or 14 inches plus the handle, and the handle is another roughly 18 inches. Now here's some hewing hatchets. Now this is similar to the broad axe. It's a hewing hatchet. A hewing hatchet has got your sharpened edge on one side, and the other side is perfectly flat, perfectly straight. And that's so that they can hew right down that log, and their chips will pop out, and they'll maintain a semblance of a straight line whenever they're making that hew joint. But the broad axe themselves are much larger. The broad axes themselves are about this big compared to what this one is right here. Now the old man scratched my initials in it, or burnt my initials in it in 1988. So he made this handmade handle. It's an oak handle. He just cut out with a draw knife and then finished up with the rasp, and then put that in the handle for me in 1988. Here's a second one here with still the original handle in it. Yeah, this is actually in pretty good shape too, but I've never sharpened it or anything. It just kind of lays here, sets on the shelf and looks pretty. And then of course you always have one that doesn't have a handle in it. You can see that handle has been broken for years and years and years. It's all rust pitted. It'll sit here, it won't eat nothing. Now everybody's familiar with Grandpa's old bench grinder. Couldn't you imagine sitting here and not so good. This one here is really pretty cool. It's in excellent condition. It's a Luther from, where the heck? Luther Grinder and Tool Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA. And this thing really is in really good shape. Just smooth as can be. Now, I don't know if you guys watch Old Sneelock's workshop, but Old Sneelock is the guru when it comes to old tools. He knows virtually everything there is about any of these old tools. But maybe he'll chime in and tell me something about this little vise. Now this is just as neat as can be. There's no brand name on it whatsoever. I don't know that it was a display model or anything like that. It's a fully functioning vise, and it's got a really good grip on it. It's even got a spring for reopening, but absolutely no markings on it whatsoever. And I know it's been used because look how this has been bent. So it's seen a little bit of abuse. But that's just the coolest little vise. My son-in-law actually gave that vise to me. I don't know, he stumbled across it somewhere. If you take a look back here on the back of the radial arm saw, you see a vise. Now, I didn't have anywhere else to store it, so I stuck that on there about a good 10 years ago or so. That's another neat little vise. It's a clamp. It clamps on from the bottom, and it's a 2.5-inch vise, and it's a little more worn. You know, it's a little bit shaky. Just another neat little vise. Now, years ago when I was getting into air conditioning and freshly married, I had a little workshop in the basement of the house we lived in, you know. Didn't have hardly any power equipment at all. But I took a piece of 1/2-inch square steel, and by hand I filed this down and made it into a little tack hammer, because I was doing a lot of woodworking, small projects and stuff back then, just to use up the hours in the evening instead of being lazy. And of course, made this little handle out of a scrap piece of oak, all by hand, and fit that in there, and never broken the handle. It still works pretty good. Then I took this out to the old man, and the old man actually tempered this for me. He put a little bit of a hard surface on both of them. He didn't get it quite right because it is mushrooming a bit up here, but I've used this for many projects. Just neat as could be. I made this thing like this, and I made another one 90 degrees to this direction because I found out when it was easier to set finish nails if I had this turned 90 degrees and I was driving down with those little bitty tiny finish nails into a small project. With that hammer sideways, built sideways onto it, you could drive that finish nail to start that finish nail a lot easier without smashing your fingers. And here's a small Tenor's hammer when I first got into air conditioning. This is a piece of 3/4-inch steel. Again, I sat down in the basement with a hacksaw and sawed this off by hand. Then I shaped this all by hand with a hand file. And of course drilled a hole with an old breast drill, you know, and a steel bit. Drilled a hole and got started in there, and kept working and worked out my oval. That's the same thing I did on the other ones over there. But this one here I never did finish up. But this is just a small Tenor's hammer, and I never did harden it. So what I'm going to do, whenever I do finish this, if I ever finish it, I'm going to go ahead and temper this and see if I can put a hard surface on it myself. Now, over the years, the old man got pretty good at being able to put a temper on material, because, you know, every spring we'd have to draw out the plowshares. You know, they'd wear down, you know, all the acres and stuff that we would plow. It would just wear the steel down, and of course, having been drawn down before, they were actually thin, so they would draw down quicker. So what you do, you heat them up, you put them on the anvil, and you beat on them, and you use the English with your swing to draw that metal out. Once you get it out, then of course I would do that a lot, and then the old man would take them and then put the finishing touches on them and put the edges on them. Then he would do the tempering, and he's actually got pretty good. He knew what colors to look for and how long to put in your bath and everything in order to get the right temper that he wanted. I never did quite pick that up, but those are the two that I made opposing in opposition to one another, all by hand. Now, I forgot about this little vise right here. Here's a vise I picked up off of the trash pile. No name that I can actually find on it. Doesn't even have a high quality clamp on it underneath here. But at least it's a nice little vise, about a 2.5-inch vise. It's worth throwing in the truck and bringing home, you know. You know, when you're walking through a yard sale and you see something that you don't necessarily need, but it's only a quarter or 50 cents, you know, you just go ahead and buy it. Look at the condition of this guy right here. I actually kind of touched it a little bit, you know, on the belt sander and everything. It's not that bad a shape. It's got a good shape to it. That's a good example. Now, my wife had a favorite aunt. Her name was Nellie, and we went to Nellie's auction whenever her father passed away. And so I think I bought a pile of double bit and single bit axes for $1 or $2, something like that. But this was the best one of the whole bunch. But I went ahead and put a handle in it, and it was an old handle, and I promptly broke it out with a bad swing. But I went ahead and marked the dull bit with my typical yellow marking paint, but I marked it Nellie on that, so I'll always remember this is Aunt Nellie's father's axe. And then, of course, here's another 25-cent yard sale axe. You can see how badly guys get on the grinders and they just go crazy. They don't try to keep a semblance of the original shape. They just kind of grind and grind until they get sharp, and you end up with a rounded off axe like that. And of course, whenever he's swinging and he's swinging completely through his stroke and he comes in contact with an abrasive ground or an abrasive surface on the ground, and he chews that away, so it gets dull quicker, so he's got to grind more, and so it just keeps eroding more and more and more. Now I just told you I don't really pay that much attention to brand of tools. If it's got good metal in it, it's good enough for me, I'm going to use it. But there is an exception. You know King Putter. Everybody's heard of King Cutter. King Cutter is the sought after brand with antique collectors, and guys get them and polish them up and put clear varnish on them and put 4 times or just ridiculous prices on them, you know. I just look at them and walk on by. I kind of chuckle a little bit, you know, and figure, yeah, what the heck, man, I don't need that. But at any rate, the old man, and I don't know what year this was, because you got to stop and think. E.C. Simmons Hardware was bought out by the King Cutter, or somehow or another E.C. Simmons Hardware combined with King Cutter, and I don't know what year that was, and became King Cutter brand axes, hand axes, all other equipment materials they had. And King Cutter is very well renowned as being a good high quality piece of tooling. And I don't know what year this was, but the old man told me and my older brother one day we was out there, and he said that his grandfather, for his birthday or for some reason, brought 2 brand spanking new axes out, and they were E.C. Simmons Hardware axes. One was blue and one was red, and they'd never been put into handles. They was brand spanking new, never been put in handles, and he had had them all these years. Like I said, that grandfather on my dad's side died in 1948. I have to think that this was in the 30s or late 20s or something like that whenever these axes were given to him. For whatever reason, Dad never did use them, and so he gave my brother one, and he gave me the red one. And so here's a brand spanking new, never been put in the handle. It's a little bit rusty though, but it's an E.C. Simmons Hardware double bit axe, and you can't hardly see. I can see it and I can read it, but here's the E.C. Simmons Hardware decal still on the front of it. It's a paper tag glued on the front of it. And here on the back side of it's got the guarantee, the warranty information, and other particulars about it. And of course, I'm sure there's a stamp on it somewhere that tells you how heavy it is. Once again, never been put in a handle. I got to figure out how old that thing is. Now, what I do on rainy days when it's just too nasty to get outside and do anything, or exceptionally cold days, I'll sit in here and I'll work on these old tools and stuff. They're all wood chisels. Some of them are very, very old, and some of them are handmade, like this particular one right here. You can always tell a blacksmith-made tool. They're notorious for using files and converting files into a chisel, and you can see by the ferrules, the way they would make ferrules to hold the handles whenever you're beating on them with a mallet, or in some cases like this one, a steel hammer. And here's another one right here that's actually made out of a file. You can still see the serrations on this one. Another way to tip off on old stuff is if you find your hollow handle like this right here. That's because that was the style in the old days. They would actually, look how mushroomed this is right here, and this one here is beginning to get mushroomed. But that's the style in the old days to make those handles to where that would insert down inside that opening. Here's another one too. This is a much larger gouge or chisel. And you can see, man, this thing here it's got some age on it. Here also is another barn building chisel. This is solid. The whole shank is solid all the way up to here. So this is made to be hit on with steel. And this is 1/4 inch, 5/16 inch thick. This has really got some heft to it. And so many of them, you pick up at a yard sale, they're all going to be mushroomed out like that because the handles, break away, whatever, over the course of the years, and then guys just go ahead and beat on them. I'm guilty of the same thing, but it's still a pretty high quality tool to have. Here's another homemade one here that's made out of a file. They shaped this down, to where they could go ahead and put their wooden handle on it, drive it into their wooden handle, and then have the stop on it, and then they trimmed it down to where they had a nice small chisel for putting finishing touches on stuff. Here's another chisel that's kind of unique. It's a corner chisel. I don't know what the proper name is, but it's obviously for trimming out, the corners, whatever you're making, mortise and tenon joints, whatever. And you can tell by the shape of this that it obviously is old as well. But that's what I do whenever it's nasty weather. Anytime I find these at a yard sale or whatever, or a flea market for cheap, I go ahead and buy them. Like this right here, they look like the guy Dickens. They're all rusty and everything, but a lot of times you can pick up this stuff, 4 or 5 of them for $0.25, 4 or 5 of them for 50 cents or $1. Well, that's a bargain. Clean this off with electrolysis or on a buffing wheel or whatever, and go ahead and go to the belt sander and put a bit of a finish on it. It's just remarkable what you can find, what people pass up. Like all these over here are drift chisels. Drift chisels all have an odd shape. This guy here's got a specific purpose. I know what I use it for. I use it for when pipe nipples break out. You can reach inside there with this and fit alongside the curvature, and you can actually get that pipe nipple beginning to collapse once you kind of saw a little bit of relief into the threads. But I've got these drift chisels like this in sizes from little bitty tiny all the way up that'll dwarf this guy right here. And here's a drift chisel that's completely offset to the side. Okay, if you notice, it's got the offset over here, and then the back side is perfectly flat. It's just a different style of a drift chisel. But there's a whole variety of these chisels over here. Some of them are fairly new, and some of them not so new. But the thing of it is, I guarantee you, I never paid more than 50 cents for a single chisel in the pile. Again, it's all about figuring out how to save money where you can do it, if you just want to put a little effort into it. You can never have too many hatchets. You know, they're kind of like bench vices and wood clamps. You just can't ever have too many hatchets. Here's a plum. It's in actually really pretty good shape, but it's old. I mean, well, old. It's from the 50s, you know, maybe early 60s, whatever. This brings up another point. Anytime you're at farm auctions, a lot of times these old timers will have a pile of handles that they, like myself, you know, that you might come up with a pile of handles that you never get around to using. Well, sometimes you can buy them at those farm auctions really, really cheap. So here a while back, I bought like a 5-gallon bucket full of hammer handles and things like that, and I put a brand new old stock reliable hickory handle in this plum and kind of cleaned this plum up. And this is my kindling splitter right here in the shed. So I keep one here. I keep 2 or 3 on the hearth in the house. I keep 2 or 3 downstairs, and I keep some in the wood furnace out by the shed. So this is an old hatchet right here. This is actually cracked right here because it's been abused. These were made very, very thin. They weren't intended to be used exceptionally heavy duty, and the guys that go ahead and hit them with another bigger hammer, that continual shock would break those right here. This is the second one I've got that I know for a fact is broken right there in that spot. The one is actually broken and collapsed. It's laying here somewhere. And here's another one here. This is the same style as that old Herkimer hatchet I've got on the mantle or on the fireplace up there at the house. And then here's one that my old man put a new handle in way back years and years ago. He had a habit of writing our initials on things. So anytime I see, you know, like this right here, I know it's the old man's writing, and he put that handle in for me way back probably in the early 80s or whatever, and this old hatchet here. No ideas of the origin of it. My daughter found this in her yard one day, so I brought that home, cleaned it up, and put a little bit of an edge on it. So that's a little 3-pound. The axe will go down to her house one of these days. It's ready to go. And then I was at my son's house a couple years ago. We're about 2 feet down in the dirt digging with the backhoe and the skid loader, and up popped this guy here. Look at this thing right here. That thing is just rotted plumb down to, I mean, that's almost petrified wood right there. Literally 2 feet underground, you know. It's a 3.5-pound Collins. But I'll bring that back to life one of these days. You'd be surprised on the construction sites, you know, whenever they're excavating, you'll see stuff turn up. I got a real nice crosscut saw that's in real bad shape. It's about a 6-foot crosscut saw I dug up in St. Charles at where the Lindenwood College's gymnasium is right now. But at any rate, this is one of those dig-ups, you know, from down under, and it's another style just very similar to those I just showed you. But you can see how thin these are right here. That's very, very thin, and continual shock is going to stress that and then fracture it right across here, or actually open this eye up. He'll smash it down and actually oval this eye, and actually the head will actually bend over to the side a little bit. This one's actually been abused. It's mushroomed out pretty bad at the top. Hey, you know what? This is stretching out too long, so I'm going to go ahead and end this thing here. But we're going to end it on a hatchet note. Back when I was in the Marine Corps, I was stationed at Parris Island, South Carolina. I was a crew chief on base maintenance, so I worked 24 hours on, 48 hours off. So on my 48 hours off, to keep myself from getting in trouble, I found an old man down there named Mr. Butler in Beaufort, South Carolina. And Mr. Butler had a little business there to where he bought and sold stuff, tore down buildings, salvaged lumber, sold used lumber and things like that. And he had the contract of tearing down a couple of the old barracks on Parris Island. And that's where I met him at, was in on base. And he was looking to hire guys, you know, for a little bit of cash money, you know what I mean? And so I started working for him in there, tearing those barracks down on my 2 days off. Then I went ahead and once he got done with that job, went out into general public, you know, helped him tear down buildings in there. Well, inside Beaufort back then, in 1974, somewhere around that area, there was a military surplus store that actually caught on fire and burnt down. Actually, it burnt a lot of the inside out of it. It was a brick building. And so I went ahead and went to work for him out there, you know, in Beaufort on my 2 days off. Well, we're salvaging all this stuff, and a lot of stuff was still good. It was just water damaged, and of course, I guess it's the insurance job. So Mr. Butler got to keep everything, that was salvageable. At least, he thought he was entitled to it. But and I think he did get the vast majority of it. But I stumbled onto a cache of hatchets that have U.S. stamped in the head of the hatchet. Now they're little 2-pound one-handed hatchets. It's something like you would carry, on your backpack or something like that, along with your entrenching tool. I was never issued one, so I don't know. I don't think it's a Marine Corps issue thing, but it does have U.S. stamped into the head of this particular one. But anyway, when I found those hatchets, I thought, man, I had me a gold mine, so I'm going to go ahead and take those. I started wheeling them out there and throwing them in the truck. Mr. Butler, he caught me and he said, oh, no. He said, we're going to use those hatchets. He said, all these bricks, we got to clean that mortar off of these bricks. So it's like, holy cow. So we went ahead and we finished up tearing down the building and had an old 56 one-ton flatbed Chevrolet with no brakes, 4-speed granny 4-speed. Because I was a farm boy and the 2 Cajuns he had with him, they were just city boys, Mr. Butler trusted me to drive that old truck with no brakes. And so at any rate, we had ropes through after we got all the stuff salvaged out of the inside, what leftover material and stuff was taken out and burnt and all that, and then discarded the other stuff, and he got my hatchets, doggone it. I may have brought home 1 or 2 others, I can't quite remember. I haven't found them lately, or haven't found them anyway. But at any rate, we'd tied in a couple of ropes between the windows or through the windows up on the 2nd floor, and I'd get out on the parking lot with that old 56 1-ton, and I just kind of ease into the rope and let it, and then ease into the rope, and Mr. Butler would be off to the side, and he'd say, a little more. Well, I'd just keep gunning a little bit, and we'd get those walls to shaking, and then we'd go ahead and we'd pull the center of the walls out. Well, we'd go ahead and do that, and when those bricks had hit that doggone parking lot, the bricks would literally explode. And by explode, what would happen is they would separate. The vast majority of them would separate from the mortar. Now there was a percentage of bricks that would break, and that was acceptable to Mr. Butler because it saved the labor of cleaning the bricks, you see what I mean? Because the vast majority of them, by hitting the pavement, would clean themselves. But it doesn't matter because me and those 2 Cajun boys, we'd sit there and they'd talk Cajun to each other and make fun of me, and then, but us 3 guys would sit there on buckets, and I mean, you talk about work our tail end off cleaning them bricks. You'd hold them in one hand, and then you just take and you just pop this old hatchet right alongside that mortar, and that mortar just skimmed right off. Well, what happened, that hatchet would get about as sharp as the back of your finger after a while. It'd wear out. We'd throw it away and grab another one, because, hey, there's plenty of them there, you know what I mean? But Mr. Butler knew he had a money saver when I found that cache of hatchets. But you know what? I got away with 1 of them. Now, I brought home this one here. I think I brought home 3, but I won't swear to that. The handles would have been burnt and everything. But the ones that Mr. Butler had, and there was about 60 of them. I know there was about 60 of them. They still had military green paint on them, but every single one of them were stamped U.S. right here in the top. And this was a bona fide military surplus store. It wasn't like the Army surplus now, which is just Chinese-made garbage for the most part, I put a handle in it, many, many years ago, and I've just got it out here in the shed. I just pick it up and use it every now and then, split a little bit of kindling. But I put an edge on this one here, and it's not been used to clean brick at all. But anyway, that's a long story, but that's the whole story behind this guy right here. So you know what? I do apologize for stretching this out so long. I know probably ain't going to watch all of it, but it don't matter. It's just kind of fun showing y'all some of the stuff. And I'm going to do a part 2 simply because I barely got started going through stuff, but I ain't going to go through it all. You know what? This is Trackman 44, and I'm out of here, guys.